We are in this series right now that's called He Knows My Name. Can everyone say, He knows my name?
He knows my name.
Say it one more time. He knows my name.
He knows my name.
And I want you to turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. If you have your Bibles, you're going to follow along on the screen as well, but I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 12. And I want to tell you this story. And I'm so excited about this message because I believe that it's going to speak to so many people today, and God is going to challenge us in an incredible way. But here's the opening story. It was spring of 1924. There was this little 4-year-old boy who had the privilege to go meet the President of the United States, who at that time was President Coolidge. And so him and his dad were there at the White House, and they were so excited to meet the president, but they were in this really long queue of people. And as they got closer to the president, they realized that every time the president would shake someone's hand, he would speak something to them. So the little boy noticed maybe he was about 50 people away. And he got so excited because he thought to himself, what is the President of the United States going to say to me? And so he gets closer and closer. The anticipation is building, and he was next in the queue. And he wiped his sweaty hands on his trousers, and he got up to meet the President. And he went up, and the President stuck his hand out. He put his hand out, and the President bent over, looked down, and said, "Move along." And the little boy was crushed because he couldn't believe he had waited all this time to hear 2 words from the president. And when he tells the story, he's in his 70s, and he said, it's words that I would never forget. You think about that, how terrible it is that you're waiting forever, and then those are the words. You're thinking that there's going to be some kind of inspiration, something that's going to challenge you, something that's going to urge this little boy to want to become president. Instead, here's 2 words that says, move along. And I think that's a massive contrast to how God is. And this is what I mean, because the God that we serve is so personal, and He is so passionate, not just to look at people and say, let me shake your hand and move along, but He wants to take the time with every single one of us to speak words that are going to impact us, that are going to move us, that are going to challenge us, empower us, and words that will carry us through some of life's toughest challenges. Aren't you glad that the God that we serve isn't like the President of the United States, but He is an awesome God who loves us and who speaks great words over our lives. And when I think about some of the great words that God speaks over our lives, the first thing that sticks out at me, and according to Genesis chapter 12, is that God loves to speak promises over His children. He loves to speak promises over His children. And the Bible is full of promises. The Bible is full of promises. That's my title for today, Cross My Heart. And I want to read from you some of the biblical promises that God shares with us. In Hebrews, He promises us His presence. In Genesis, He promises us His protection. In Isaiah, He promises His power and His provision. In John, He promises His leading and His forgiveness. In Matthew, He promises us rest. In Samuel, He promises to be faithful. In Psalms, He promises His guidance. And if these are the only promises that God speaks over our lives, our entire life, we would be able to walk through this earth fulfilled and excited. Do you know that? Like if we never heard any other word from God except the promises that are in the Bible, those words and those promises would be enough to carry us our entire lives. But here's the beauty of the gospel, that we serve a real God, a passionate God, who wants to know each and every one of us in a personal way. And He also speaks promises to each and every one of us in our current situations, in our circumstance, and what we're going through. And the fact that He knows our names gives Him the ability to speak these promises over our lives. And when Jesus Christ calls us by name, and when He speaks those promises over our lives, these promises are amazing. These promises are personal, and these promises are powerful. And Jesus has been giving us promises to His children ever since the Lord has been giving us promises ever since the book of Genesis, which is why we're going back to Genesis chapter 12. And the Bible talks about how Jesus Christ, how God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if He's the same God who cannot change, and if He was sharing promises and giving promises to His children by name, isn't he the same God that's still going to speak promises to us, and to his children even today? Absolutely. So let's read Genesis chapter 12, and I want to share with you today what the Bible teaches us according to this passage and what I see about the promises of God. Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 1. Follow along if you don't have your Bibles, and this is what the Bible says. It says, "The Lord had said to Abram," and see, here he is, he's talking to Abram, and he says this, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you." And here's one of the promises. He says this, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families," the second promise, "all the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed. I highlighted this because this is what Abram did to fulfill some of this promise. And Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they had arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by the Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "I will give this land to your descendants," the third promise that we see. And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. After that, Abram traveled south, and he set up camp in the hill country, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and dedicated to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord. Then Abram continued traveling south by stages toward the Negev. So what does the Bible teach us according to this passage, what I've seen about the promises of God and what it means when he speaks promises to our lives? Number one is this, if you're taking notes, is that God, he always keeps his promise. God always keeps his promises. I was sharing this before as I was reading the passage. There's three major promises that were made to Abraham. Abram, his name was later changed. And here they are. It says that he would make him into a great nation, that he was going to inherit the land, and right now that land didn't belong to him, it belonged to the Canaanites. But one day he was saying that the land of Canaan will be yours. And the third promise was this, is that he would be the father of generations to come. And when you think about the life of Abram, and he promises that he's going to be a great nation, that he's going to have land, and he's going to be the father of all these generations to come, think about it, at a man of 75 years old, God says, "I'm going to give you all these great things." And here he was with his family in his land, and God says, "I want you to move away." So he's saying this, he said, "Listen, I have these promises for you, Abram. I've got these promises for you, and what I want you to do is I want you to leave your country, and if you leave your country, everything that you're accustomed to, everything that you're comfortable with, these promises will be fulfilled." But this man at this point, he had a wife, he had a nephew, he had no children, he had no land, he just began to travel. At 75 years old, he just begins to walk, but there was something inside the faith of Abram that when God spoke a promise to him, he said, "If God speaks it, my faith is so big and it's so wild to believe that God's going to make it happen. I don't see how it's going to happen, but I know I serve a God who keeps his promises." And then we see this in Deuteronomy 10:22. This is what happens. As these promises are fulfilled, some of them are fulfilled that Abram can see, and some of them are fulfilled way past Abram, and some of them are still being fulfilled today every time somebody commits their life to Jesus. Deuteronomy 10:22 says this, "Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 persons in all, and now the Lord has made you as numerous as the stars in heaven." He became this great nation, the nation of Israel. Deuteronomy 35, it says this, "God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers." There's another promise being fulfilled because God always keeps his promises. Galatians 3:29, "If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring according to the promise." What God promised Abraham seemed impossible, and it sounded nice, it probably was very encouraging, but I'm sure there were times that Abraham didn't understand exactly what God meant But this is what's so awesome about Abram, is that he never focused on what he didn't see or wasn't yet happening. He chose to focus, and he believed God. And his faith was stirred. And even though he didn't understand it, he knew that these promises were going to happen because he trusted God. And how do we know this? Romans 4:19-22 says this. And this is talking about him when he had no baby. Imagine a 75, Julie's pregnant, for some of you who don't know that. She's going to be giving birth in about 8 months, something like that, 9 months. And we think about this, and he says, listen. No, because we were talking about this. It's not, I don't know, but we're in a little disagreement, but I'm sure she knows better than I do when she's going to have a baby. So at 75 years old, God says, you're going to be a great nation. But he says, God, I have no kids. And God says, don't worry about that. I'll take care of you. And this is what it says in Romans 4:19. It says, Abraham, he didn't focus on his own impotence and say it's hopeless. This 100-year-old body could never father a child. Nor did he survey Sarah's decades of infertility and give up. He didn't tiptoe around God's promise, asking cautiously skeptical questions. He plunged into the promise and came up strong, ready for God, sure that God would make good on what he had said. And that's why it is said, Abraham was declared fit before God by trusting God to set him right. So Abraham had this faith. So let me ask you this question. Does your faith say that God has the power to do what he has promised? Like, do you believe that? See, I want people to walk out of church this entire month. If you've never heard the voice of God speak anything over your life, that I want you to know, and I want us to hear the voice of God and know that he speaks promises over our lives. But let me ask you, if you have heard the voice of God, have you forgotten maybe that what God says is going to happen? The Bible says in Isaiah 46:11, everything I plan will come to pass, for I do whatever I wish. In other words, the Lord's saying here, if I said it, I will do it. What promises has God spoken to you? Have you ever taken the time to listen to the voice of God and hear promises that you know beyond the shadow of a doubt have been the voice of God over your life, over your circumstance, over what you're going through, and over your future? What promises has he spoken over to you? You know, I think about our lives, Julie and I, and the many times that God has spoken to us. I will never forget, it was December of 2010. We were sitting in a church in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and I was getting ready to preach, and we were in a great time of worship. And see, in order for us to be in America, we have to travel to dozens, if not hundreds of churches, raise our support to be here. And we knew we were going to be planting a church in Edinburgh. We didn't know how it was going to work out. And we were scared, we were nervous, trusting God. And at the end of the service, I said, Julie, what was God sharing with you? Or, did he speak anything exciting over to you? And this is what he said to Julie. He said, I will give you everything you need. And he said, listen, it's not just the financial things that you need. He said, but I'm going to give you the people. I'm going to give you the resources. I'm going to give you the building. I'm going to make this thing happen. So when we come here to Edinburgh and we begin to just see Bridge Family Church begin to take place, I think about Mike and Tina, and now Margot and Darcy, and everybody in this room that has ever helped out in any way. Do you guys know that you are an answer to the promise? You guys are the fulfillment to the promise that God had spoken to us. We have a church, when I filled out a survey just a few months ago, and at that point we were averaging about 22 people, and 18 out of the 22 people were involved in some small way in the life of Bridge Family Church. And God reminds us, he said, Dave, do you remember in 2010, 5 years ago, when I spoke over your life that said, I will provide everything? He said, this is an answer to that prayer, and here is the promise being fulfilled right before your eyes. What promises has God spoken to you? When we were believing for a building, we weren't even a year old yet. I just remember God just told me in my prayer time, he said, you will have a building in Stockbridge. And we haven't seen that happen yet, or it could be our offices, it could be this building. I have no idea. I believe that we're going to have our own building and our own premises here in Stockbridge, and I can't wait for that day, because I believe that when God speaks something over our lives, what he promises, he keeps. God also shared with me, he said, Dave, when you start this church and you get rolling, he said, there's going to be something significant and big that takes place here in Stockbridge. And right away, I think of this massive church. I go straight to like Hillsong or Jesus Culture, right? And I said, oh man, that's amazing. But then he reminds me, he said, Dave, I never told you that it was going to be huge in numbers. He said, I'm telling you, this is going to be a place of influence. And what's going to happen here in the life of Bridge Family Church is going to be big. See, some of the promises have been fulfilled, but some are yet to be fulfilled. But there's times in our lives that many of the promises of God can only happen when certain conditions are met. Do you know that there's times in our lives that some of the promises from God can only happen when certain conditions are met? They're conditional. Let me explain this to you. The Lord said to Abraham, I want you to leave your country, and then I'm going to make you into a great nation. I highlighted that in the scripture because in order for Abram to be made into a great nation, in order for that promise to begin to form, the one thing that needed to happen was that Abram needed to set his life aside in favor of God's blessing. He needed to leave his land in favor of God's land. He needed to forfeit his inheritance in favor of God's inheritance. He needed to abandon his family in favor of God's promises. There are promises of God that can only be met when certain conditions are fulfilled. In other words, God is looking for us, sometimes for us, to take the first step, to have the faith that's trusting and believing. And he says this, if you do this, then I will do this. You know, I think if I never came to Edinburgh to plant a church, even though God spoke to me specifically about giving me the resources and all I needed to make this thing happen, that promise would never be fulfilled, not because God doesn't keep his promises, but because I didn't meet my end of the bargain. You understand what I'm saying? There's times in our lives where God's going to say, I'm going to give you the man of your dreams. But he says, I want you to set yourself up somehow, some way before I can make that happen. He might say, I'm going to put a certain career in your path, but I want you to fill out these applications, and I'm going to take you through these trials and these circumstances. I want you to trust me and take that step and just get moving. And once you start moving, and you might not know where to go, you will see those promises fulfilled, because when I say it's going to happen, it's going to happen. What promises has God spoken to you? Has God spoken anything over your life in regards to your ministry? Has God given you any dreams, any plans, any goals when it comes to your personal ministry? Has God told you anything specifically? What about relationships? Has he promised you anything over your finances? You know, I think about people in this world, and sometimes it looks like people who don't believe in Jesus seem like they're winning. You know, you look at people in this world, and they look like they're happy, and they're creating all these great movies, and they've got all these great resources. And sometimes, us as Christians, we serve the God of the impossible, and yet that sometimes that we feel like we're not reaching our full potential. But I believe that in this room that there's still potential of some of the greatest books to ever be written, some of the greatest dissertations to ever see the Edinburgh University, some of the best relationships, some of the best doctors and lawyers and physios and teachers. We are a people of promise, because when our God speaks promise over us, something amazing happens that we've never seen before. But sometimes those promises can only be met when certain conditions are fulfilled. Maybe you've never heard God speak promise over your life. Well, hopefully by the end of this service, we will hear from the Lord. And God, this year will just be a year of hearing those promises. Number 2, his promises are always on time. His promises are always on time. Abram was 75 years old when he was given the first promise. Anybody here 75 older? Close to 75? Nobody? Look at that. We have nobody close to 75. Think about life. You know, my mom went to a church the other day, maybe a few weeks ago. She just retired, and the woman spoke to her, and she said, Lucia, I want you to know, though you just retired in your 60s, she's like, the prophet said, I want you to know that life's not over. And though you feel like you might not be having an impact in this world, I want you to know that the best years are ahead of you. So she's getting ready to move to Scotland for like 2 months, when the baby's born. She said, I could do 2 things, see my grandbaby and just walk around the streets and just pray for the church. And I'm like, come on, Mom, let's make this happen. She's ready for it. It doesn't matter how old you are. This is what happens. Abram was 75 years old when he was given his first promise. He was given then a promise of a seed. And he probably didn't understand. He's like, how am I going to become this great nation? How am I going to fulfill like the sands on the seashores, the stars in the skies? I don't have my own baby here. But it wasn't until he was 100 years old that the promise of a son was fulfilled. So he waited 25 years for that promise to kind of even begin to take shape. And it wasn't until another 430 years after the Israelites were free from Pharaoh in Egypt that the promise was fulfilled of taking over the promised land. Did God make a mistake? Absolutely not. Did he forget? Nope. Was his timing just right? You better believe it. Because when it comes to the promises of God, his promises are always on time. But here's the problem. As humans, we just see things linear. You know what I mean? When God spoke to me about having a building, I want to be the one to see that promise being fulfilled. But I know that God never said that, Dave, you're going to be the one to pastor the church through that building phase or whatever that's going to look like. I want it to be me, and it could be me, but God never said it was going to be me. But see, we want things to happen in a certain way, in a certain order, and in our timing. But God says, nope, my timing is perfect. When I became the youth pastor, we had a youth group of about 65 to 70 students on a weekly basis coming out. Sounds great, but when you got 12 to 18-year-olds in one room, it's mayhem. It was crazy. We loved it, though. So every week we would come in, and when I first became a youth pastor, Julie and I would just dream for this youth ministry. And one of the dreams, one of the promises that God said to us, he said, you're going to see this room full of teenagers. So I was young. I was just started. We already had like 65, 70. I said, man, this is going to be amazing. And I was like, I'm going to have the biggest youth group in New Jersey. That was my goal. And so there would be times we would peak up at 100, but there was still another 50 or 70 you can cram into that room. And then there would be times we run 90, and it was crazy. And we didn't understand. We still had that in the bottom of our minds. But then I kind of forgot. 3 years later, I kind of forgot. And then we were leaving the church, and we had 3 more services. The last of the 3 services, we did this big youth rally. It was churches all over, friends invited friends, and that day, Julie, remember that? Like there was probably about 150 teenagers in our sanctuary, and I was standing in the balcony of our church, and I remember God spoke to me. He said, I told you. And I remember I knew exactly what he was talking about. See, I thought it was going to happen during my full time there, and every week we're going to be ministering to this many students, and it was going to be amazing. But God never said that. He said, this place is going to be full. And he never told me when, and it happened 3 weeks before I left. Why? Because God's timing is always, God's promises are always on time. So I want to encourage you, don't give up on some of those promises. Maybe you've misread some of them. Maybe you've imagined something different was going to happen. But I want to encourage you, stay on course. Don't deviate. Keep going. Because what you've been told to do, and it's time to keep going with what you've been called to do, because it's time to have faith and believe that his promises will get accomplished in his perfect timing. Many times we interpret these promises through our own filters, and we're wrong. I don't know how many times I've been wrong on God's promises. I'm glad I got Julie right. That was amazing. I knew she was the one for me to marry, and she actually almost broke up with me, but we won't go into that story because we're talking about happy promises that were being fulfilled. God's promises are always on time. Number 3, my last point here. He will confirm his promises. He will confirm his promises. And when I say that word confirm, he's going to remind you from time to time. And sometimes you're like, well, was this God? You know what? Throughout our lives, we're going to hear from God over and over again. And he's going to speak to us words to remind you what I spoke over your life is still there, and I don't want you to lose it. I was looking this up 19 times. God had to confirm to Abram the promises. 19 times over the course of about 25 years. So Isaac was born for 25 years, so then he was a teenager before he almost sacrificed him. We won't get into that today. So say about 35 to 40 years, and in about 35 to 40 years, God reminds and confirms his promises to Abram 19 times. So I figure that's about once every 2 years. And I'm like, you know what, Lord? I might not need to be reminded all the time. But maybe I'm in a season right now. God, can you give me a confirmation of your promise? Lord, I know that you're there, and I know that you're real, and I know that you've got great things in store for me, but I don't see it happening, God. And maybe, Lord, I'm due for one of those promise reminders. Can you confirm something in me? And this is why our quiet time with God is so important. Listen, I don't know about your personal Bible reading time, and I don't know about your personal prayer and worship time, but I do know this, that if those times are a priority in your life, God's going to be able to speak life over you, and you're going to hear those promises, and you're going to hear those confirmations. Listen, obviously God can do anything. He can speak to you if you haven't talked to him in a long time, but it's so much easier to hear his voice when you're spending time with him, the promise giver. He's a promise keeper. Because when we read his word, we see these promises. When he speaks to us, you can know the voice of God. I might not know a lot of things, but I know when God calls me, and I know when he challenges me, and I know when he speaks to me, and I know when he's stirring my heart to do something. Do not forget those promises. Maybe you have forgotten some of the things that he's spoken over your life. Maybe the world has kind of battered you and beat you up, and you know what those promises are, and yet you feel like giving up. But those dreams and those visions and the desires that God placed inside of you, today is a day for them to just be pulled out of you, given new life, and saying, God, thank you for those promises. And I'm confirmed one more time that your promises are true. God will always, I believe, confirm his promises. On every table, you will see a little jar of sand. And on the tables, we also have pens and some notepads if we want to share some of those things out. And we're just going to take a few moments here in just a little bit. Do you know why God speaking our name is so important? Because when we understand that he speaks our name, it goes from just a ritual of church to this passionate relationship of loving God. You know, I think that's why I'm so excited about God, and I go through challenges and we get hit with a lot of things, but I can wake up and just know that it's going to be okay, that God's taking care of me, because I hear the voice of God. But I know this, that in a group this side, that there's probably some people who have never heard God's voice, and that's what that jar is for you. Maybe you're here and you've never heard the voice of God, and on a little piece of paper, I want you to write down, God, this year, tonight, I want to hear your voice like I've never heard it before. What does it sound like, Jesus? Give me the faith, just like Abram, to believe, to have the faith, to know that you're going to speak to me. That my relationship is going to be so real. And that's more important than anything else I want to share today, is learning what the voice of God sounds like for this church. Because when we do that, I'm telling you, our relationship with God becomes so real, it becomes so personal, and it becomes so exciting. But maybe you're here, and God has spoken some of those promises, and you have forgotten, or you don't see the timing, or you're kind of frustrated. I want you to write those down on a little piece of paper. And I want you to say, God, I just need to hear from you one more time. What are some promises? Maybe it's a relational promises. Just write it down. Maybe it's a ministry promise. Maybe it's a family promise. Maybe it's a financial promise. Maybe it's a educational promise. You know, there's a part in the story of Abram when he's so confused and he doesn't know what's happening. And he's standing on the seashore and he sees all these stars and he's in front of all the sand, and this is what God says to him. He says, Abram, I want you to look up to the sky. You see all those stars? Your seed is going to be greater than all those stars. You can't even count them. And he looks onto the sand like you guys have in that jar. That's what the sand represents, this promise to Abram. And he says, Abram, I want you to just look at sand. And maybe he's there with his bare feet if you've ever stepped in sand before. And God speaks to him and says, Abraham, maybe he picks up a scoop full of sand and he's holding in his hand, he says, every single piece of sand You're going to have more descendants than you can even count. When God speaks of promises, He will keep those promises. Write down some of those promises. Maybe they haven't been fulfilled in your life yet, and say, God, I'm going to hold you to them. I want to see them fulfilled. And again, maybe you've never heard His voice. You say, Lord, I want to hear some promises over my life. I want to know what your voice sounds like, God. This year in 2015, will you speak my name, God, louder than ever? And like always, I want to encourage everyone. If you've never heard that voice and you want to understand what that sounds like, come and see me at the office. We want to walk with people and journey with them until they can figure out what that voice sounds like. I want you to roll up that promise that you made, and I want you to put it inside your jar. And anytime you've forgotten, I want you to hold it up. I'll get you a jar if you haven't had a jar, and I want you to say, this is a promise for me. And God, I'm going to remember this, and when I forget, I'm going to go back to that jar, and I'm going to remember from time to time. Put it somewhere that you can see. Put it on your dresser. Put it in your car. And put it on your university books, on your computer. And every time you see that it would be a huge reminder of your promise. If you've got more than one promise, fill that thing up. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just fill it up and say, come on, God, I want to see these fulfilled. And as they begin to be fulfilled in our lives, that we would share them with so many people. Why? Because it will remind God. It will remind them and remind us how awesome and powerful our God is.